Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
Were you surprised or not? And is this more of the same, or is it just, the pendulum has swung over the last 25 years between reformists and hardliners?
I was very surprised. I think most people were surprised. Over 6 weeks ago, when Ebrahim Raisi died in that helicopter crash, I don't think that people really anticipated that a reformist would make a comeback. Reformists were very much marginalized after President Rouhani left office, and we really saw conservative consolidation of power across Iran's elected institutions and unelected institutions. So this was really a unique moment for reformists to try to make a comeback. And Bezeshkian, I think, was a real sort of someone emerging from the ashes in this moment, and they worked very hard to build a campaign around him.
So why was he allowed to run? I mean, the last time Raisi ran, he had basically been given carte blanche, right? I mean, they banned all reformist candidates from being able to challenge. Why was he allowed to run this time? Did they just think, well, we'll throw a bit of something to the people and they'll never win?
Well, I think we have to consider what Iran has been through over the past few years. In 2022, 23, we saw the very dramatic and powerful women life protests that were brutally repressed, but it became very clear that Iran's leadership had a broken, damaged relationship with people across the country, not just young people in Tehran, but really writ large, ethnic groups, women, young people, also in villages and towns. And this might have been an olive branch of an effort by parts of the state to draw in people and showcase some engagement with the process, even if it's not fully free and fair, even if it's not really meaningful or will transform the Islamic Republic, it could build back some legitimacy.
And there was a very low turnout, very low. I mean, it's been just getting lower and lower and lower historically, and that's a threat to the regime. I mean, they kept leaving the polls open longer and longer, and there was a massive shout by the supreme leader to get people out to the polls. How threatening is that to the regime?
Well, I think on the one hand, it shows us that Iran is now a status quo power. The Islamic Republic has been around for long enough that its voting turnout is the same as many in democracies. And so, what does that tell us about the Islamic Republic? It's not as transformational. It's sort of stubborn and resistant to change. On the other hand, though, there is a huge gap between state and society. And in the first round of the vote, 60% of the electorate chose not to vote, boycott, or just abdication and choosing to not engage, I think is really interesting. And it speaks to a broader and deeper dynamic that Masoud Pezeshkian is going to try and address, I imagine.
So the deeper dynamic in general for people is the total collapse of the economy for them, the hardship that they live in, plus the total isolation that Iran is under. They can't travel, they're not welcome elsewhere, they feel that they have no future in this Iran. Reformists feel that if we could get the sanctions lifted, that is one way to address this. Is that going to be his main target?
I think he has a few policies that he wants to take forward. Internally, I think the social dynamics are important to try and address. He didn't commit to being able to reverse the hijab laws per se, but perhaps to roll back the oppression, the presence of the morality police. He spoke about internet censorship as important. And I think he faces...
As important to combat.
Yes, to combat. Not, he doesn't support it, to be clear. But he faces a bit of an uphill battle because the institutions are dominated by conservatives. So he has to build consensus across the system that will allow him to open up and lightly liberalize the social environment. And then to your question on the economy, that is the key issue. But the economy is deeply tied to foreign policy and foreign dynamics.
So how should foreign leaders, the United States, others, be looking at another reformist? They feel that they had a better time of it with Khatami, better time of it with Rouhani, with the JCPOA, and now there's another one. And around him are people who are very, very intimately, they were the negotiators for the JCPOA. How should the United States, Western Europe, look at this man, Bzezshkian?
It's quite interesting because, as you've laid out, clearly the West has been burned in investing in Iranian reformers and reformists. They haven't seen the transformation. They haven't watched Iranian politicians being able to deliver change. But on the other hand, this is an opening inside Iran that the West or the U.S., President Biden and his team, but also European leaders could try and build on. The sort of storm clouds around Iran are growing. We might not feel them and see them right now, but there are a lot of interconnected issues that are very frustrating. There's the nuclear program that is accelerating at a dramatic level. There are tensions that have been building up with France, Germany, and the UK. They've issued a resolution against Iran. So there are tensions
on the nuclear issue.
On the nuclear issue. Secondly, of course, Europe is deeply concerned about Iran's support for Russia. So that emerges. And
Putin and Bzezshkian had a call today.
Exactly. And the Europeans have made it clear that Iranian transfer of missiles to Russia is a red line. Thirdly, of course, Iran's support for the axis of resistance.
And Bzezshkian put out a statement to say that it was no change. I mean, it was boilerplate, but... Yes. Using that word resistance, we will continue to support them.
Exactly. So those three dynamics are there. And then you add to that the human rights in Iran. You have the persistent detention of dual nationals and foreign nationals by the Islamic Republic, and Iran's campaign against activists, journalists, Iranian citizens abroad. So you mix that all together, and you can sort of imagine European politicians feeling very frustrated. They know Bzezshkian on his own isn't going to be transformational, but they could try to incrementally address some of these files.
Like they did with Rouhani.
Potentially.
Essentially. I mean, they got a nuclear deal, which then the United States pulled out of, let's not forget. But first, before I ask you about that, who is he? I mean, did he just come from nowhere? I called him a 69-year-old cardiac surgeon.
I think he has an interesting background. I mean, he is a doctor by profession. He served during the Iran-Iraq War. What's interesting to me in his biography is that, like President Biden, he lost his wife and his child in a tragic car accident. He chose to never remarry. He sort of raised his children by himself. He has Azeri roots as well as Kurdish roots.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a bit of dynamism there.
And he was a minister, right?
Minister of Health under Khatami, and he served in Parliament. And it's important to note that in the previous parliamentary elections, first he was not permitted to run by the Guardian Council. There was then an appeal, and then he got in, and then he, of course, was elected to Parliament. So he's an insider to a certain degree. He understands the system. I think he knows how to play the system. He has remained steadfast and very overt in being loyal to Khamenei, and I think that is perhaps an astute strategy to push through some of these difficult issues if he can.